So today we are talking about the Pythagorean theorem. And here's the Pythagorean theorem. It says the sum of the squares of the sides of a right triangle equal the square of the hypotenuse. All that math language just means this formula. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And it's important that you know that C is always the hypotenuse, which means it has to be directly across from the right angle. And it's always the longest side. The hypotenuse of any right triangle is always the longest side. Okay? So what it's actually saying, when we say the word squared, A squared, that's really the area of the square that has side length A. So here the side length is 3. So if we found the area of that square, we would say 3 squared, which is 9. It's 9 blocks. That's the total area. For B, our side length is 4. So if we find B squared, which is really the area of that square, we would have 4 times 4, or 4 squared, which is 16. And then C. C has a side length of 5, and 5 squared is 25. So if you think about the formula, A squared, 3 squared, plus B squared, which is 4 squared, equals C squared. And 9 plus 16 does equal 25. For every right triangle, this formula does work. I really like this picture though, because I want you to understand that when we say A squared, the reason we call it square instead of saying A raised to the second power is because when you raise something to the second power, it's like finding the area of a square. Okay, so let's start solving some problems. What is the length of the hypotenuse of the right triangle shown? So remember, when we use Pythagorean theorem, we're going to plug them into the formula, and C is always the hypotenuse, which they've labeled that for us. As far as A and B are concerned, it doesn't matter what order you plug them in. I usually like to plug them in least to greatest. So I'm going to say 33 squared plus 56 squared equals C squared. Now remember, we're solving an equation. So our ultimate goal is to get C by itself. So let's go ahead and jump over to our calculator and let's do 33 squared. 33 squared. And you can do these in separate steps or you can do them in the same step. If they're on the same side, I'm just going to go ahead and do it in the same step. So 33 squared plus 56 squared. That's 4,225. So I typed this whole piece into my calculator and I got 4,225 equals C squared. Now I got to get the C by itself. Right now it says C squared. So that tells me that the area of this big old side C is 4,225, but in this case it didn't ask for the area, it asked for the side length. So we got to get rid of the square. And to get rid of the square, use square root, because squares and square roots are opposite, so they cancel. And then we'll go back to our calculator and type in the square root. Oops, clear that. Square root of 420, what was it? Was it 4,000? I already forgot. 4,225, okay. And so that equals 65. So side length C equals 65 centimeters. And that is your answer. You know, we talked about last week, when we take a square root, we actually get a positive and a negative answer. But in this case, it does not make sense to have a negative length. You can't measure and get a negative length. So we only write down the positive answer, C equals 65 centimeters. Which right triangle has a hypotenuse of exactly 58 millimeters? Okay, so we just have to try each of these. We're going to plug each of these into the Pythagorean theorem, which is A squared plus B squared equals C squared, and we'll see which one works. So I'm going to do this blue one first. 23 squared plus 35 squared equals C squared. And then I'm going to solve it. So I'm going to do 23 squared plus 35 squared in my calculator. 23 squared plus 35 squared, and that equals 1,754. And then I got a square root because I need to cancel the square, so square root both sides. Squares and square roots cancel, and then I'll type this in my calculator. the square root of 1754. That does not equal exactly 58. That equals 41.8. So this one's not my answer. All right, then we would check the next one. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Go ahead and type this chunk in your calculator. So 30 squared plus 50 squared. $3,400. And since I'm solving for C and I got to get rid of the square, I'm going to square root it because the square and square root cancel. And then the square root of 3,400 is 58.3. That's really close, but it said exactly 58. So I don't think that's my answer either. Let's try this last one. So we're going to do A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And it might be confusing, you guys, on how I plug them in, but I always just plug them in the formula least to greatest. Since they're not labeled which one's A and B, I always just plug it in least to greatest. So 40 squared plus 42 squared. And y'all, you know what's really cool? If you get the hang of these and you know, okay, I want to get C by myself, so I know that I'm going to have to square it because squares and square roots cancel, you can actually type this whole thing in your calculator in one step. Let me show you that since I haven't shown you that yet. You can do the square root of 40 squared plus, what was it? 42. Oops, got to make sure I stay under the radical. Plus 42 squared. You could type it in all in one step and it'll tell you that that is 58. Now, if I just totally confused you, don't type it in all in one step. You can type it in separately. But that is a really cool shortcut if you're good at your calculator. All right, Rachel drives 28 miles east, then drives 45 miles north. How far is she from her starting point? All right, so let's start here with a starting point. And let's see, we have north, south, west, and east. So she goes from her starting point and she goes 28 miles east and then drives 45 miles north. We want to figure out how far she is from her starting point. This is where she ended, ending point, and that's her starting point, and we want to know that distance. Well, if you realize, hopefully you can see that this made a right triangle, and that side is across from the 90-degree angle, so that is the hypotenuse, C. So we can solve this using the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and type this side in my calculator, 28 squared plus 45 squared. That equals 2,809. Oops, wait, I wrote that wrong, didn't I? What was it? 2,809, and I put 2,089. Jeez. Oops. And remember, we're trying to solve for the side length C. We want to know the distance, so we got to get rid of the square. The opposite of squaring is square rooting. So we will square root both sides because squares and square roots cancel. The square root of 2,809 is 53. So she is 53 miles from where she started. We'll say 53, sorry. All right, and remember, I should be saying this every time, I haven't been, but when you take the square root, every square root has a positive and negative answer, but you can't drive negative 53 miles, so we only leave the positive answer. Okay, the size of a TV is given by the length of its diagonal. That is the distance from one corner of the screen to the opposite corner. If a TV has a width of 37 inches and a height of 20 inches, what is the TV? All right, this is true in real life, guys. If you go and buy a 50-inch TV, it does not mean that this width is 50. It actually means that the diagonal is 50 inches long. Okay, that's true in real life when you go real life TV shopping. So I know it doesn't automatically look like it, but this actually is a right triangle because we know in rectangles each corner is 90 degrees. And so this makes this right triangle where the diagonal is C because it's the hypotenuse across from the 90-degree angle. Let me go ahead and label the rest. The width is 37 and the height is 20. So we can pull this little right triangle out with 37 and 20, and we can solve for C using the Pythagorean theorem. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I'm going to go ahead and type all of this in my calculator. (20) plus 37², and that equals 1769, or 1769. But we want to find the side length C, so we got to get rid of the square. The opposite of squaring is square rooting, so we will square root each side because squares and square roots cancel. And then the square root of 1769, let's see. Oops, I missed a 7 there. That's approximately 42 inches. So this would be a 42-inch TV. All right, that's it for today, y'all. I hope this helps with Pythagorean theorem.